All right. Hi, Wendy. I saw Paula was on just a few minutes ago. If you're here, go ahead and put in a little note in the comments and give me a shout out. So, we are talking about photographing your art like a pro. And this is a webinar, workshop, live event, presentation, whatever you want to call it, that's sponsored by the Brazos Valley Art League. And my name is Carol Henricks, and I am your presenter. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I've been doing photography semi-seriously since 2004, completed a couple of photography programs at different institutions, and my background is primarily in instructional technology and teaching online. And so I was really drawn to digital photography, not so much film photography. So I've been doing this a while, and I volunteered to share a little bit about what I know with you about photography to help you get quality images of your artwork. So I have some artist friends, obviously, and I do get questions all the time about how can I get good photos of my art? I take a picture, it doesn't look like what my artwork looks like. And so that can be a problem for a lot of reasons. Why is it important to have good quality images? Well, it's important because you're trying to present a professional image, right? The things that people struggle most with are knowing which settings on the camera are essential. What do I need to set? What do I need to not worry about? And then people tell me, well, my colors that I see in my pictures don't look like the color in my art. And there are some things that we'll talk about this evening to help you get accurate colors. And we're also going to talk about getting correct exposure. That's all part of it, right? So it's important because you know that first impressions matter, and you know that people take seconds and maybe sometimes less than seconds to decide whether they're going to like your artwork or not. And you want to make sure that you've done everything to create a favorable first impression, especially for jurors and judges. Sometimes they are looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of entries, and they only have a short window of time to determine whether they're going to accept the entries or not. You don't want a poor quality photo of your artwork to jeopardize, your chances of winning an award or even making it into a contest or a publication. Buyers likewise instantly make up their mind about whether they're going to buy your art, fork over their hard-earned cash, to make that part of their collection. So we want to put our best forward and put it out there. So here's what I think that you need to know in order to do this. You need to know camera settings. Not all of them. You just need to know a couple essential ones. You need to know about lighting. You need to know about getting proper exposure. We're not going to go into depth in this, but we'll cover just the essentials. You also need to know about some basic edits, and I'm going to share with you the basic edits that I think every digital photograph needs. Now, let me also put a little caveat in here. I recently taught a 7-hour face-to-face workshop over these topics. And so obviously there is no way that we're going to be able to cover all of this in depth. We are going to touch on all of these. But I do want to let you know that the Art League and I are partnering to offer a workshop, a virtual workshop or an online workshop to cover these topics. And I'm going to share the details about that with you at the end of this presentation. Okay, let's get started with camera settings. And I'm only going to talk about the top three right now. And these are image size, image quality, and white balance. And if you get nothing else out of this presentation, if you can get these three things set up in your camera, I think you're going to have much better results than you have had. So as with most things, image-wise, and maybe others, size does matter. And as far as what we're talking about, getting a very high quality image for your artwork, we want the biggest. Bigger is better in this case. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about the amount of storage space that the file takes up on the media? Are we talking about how large this is printed out on a piece of paper? Not exactly, but what we're going to talk about affects both of these things. We're talking about resolution. Now, you may or may not know that digital images are made up of individual squares that are arranged in rows and columns. These squares of color are what we call pixels. And if you zoom in on any digital image far enough, you can actually see the individual pixels that make up the image. High resolution images have more pixels than low resolution images. And I have to say that really slowly because I get tongue-tied. That means that you can zoom in or enlarge high resolution images much larger than you can on the low resolution images. Eventually you'll get to a point, if you try to enlarge low res images, you'll start seeing pixelation and you'll be able to see the individual squares. And I know you've seen that before, so now you know what it's called. So you may be asking, how do I get the highest resolution? Well, you need to pick a camera with a large sensor. So let's talk about how you do that and what that is. At the heart of every digital camera is an image sensor. Sensors are measured as far as their size, as far as their pixel size, or the total number of pixels. The illustration that I have here is, it's an illustration of a sensor from inside a camera. And you can see the squares here are representative, or they correspond to the squares of color that you saw in the previous image. So each one of these would correspond to a pixel in the photo or the image that we saw earlier. And remember, we're talking about bigger is better and more is better. So how does the light get to the pixels? Well, the light reflects off your subject, it goes through the lens, and it goes to the back of the camera where the sensor sits. The sensor takes the place of what film where film used to be in the cameras. And so on this sensor, each pixel or each photodiode absorbs the light that hits it. And not all sensors are created equal. And so that's the whole point of this part of the discussion, is because we're trying to create the best image. Therefore, we need to pick the right sensor. So let's take a look at some sensor characteristics from different cameras. Because I hear a lot of people say, I just use my cell phone to take pictures of my art. And so I hope by the time we get through this part of the discussion, I'll have you convinced that you're not going to get the best quality image using your cell phone. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. And most of these are cameras that I have, so that I had readily available so that I could look up the specifications. I have an iPhone XR. I think it's pretty cool, and I use it a lot. When I look at the photos that I get from this, these are the pixels. Remember, the pixels are arranged in columns and rows. So it's got 4,032 columns and 3,024 rows of pixels. If you multiply those, you're going to get 12.2 million pixels, or a resolution of 12.2 megapixels. And if you look at the iPhone specs, the camera specs, it will say it's a 12 megapixel camera. When I look on my disk and I look at the file size, the average file size of the photos that I've taken with this camera, they average about 5 megabytes. That's how much physical space they take up on my storage media. Next, I have a Canon PowerShot, and granted, it's pretty old, but I love it. It's small, it takes great family snapshots, and it fits really well in my pocket, and it's smaller than my phone. So I do use it a lot. So I wanted to compare the quality of the images that I get from that with my iPhone. Well, you can tell right away it has more megapixels. So you would think it's better. It's got more rows, more columns. It's rated at 14 million pixels, 14 megapixels. But if you look at the average file size of these images, it's only 3.4 megabytes. So it's got more pixels, but the file size is smaller. So that's telling me that something's being lost. Something's being done to that file. All right, let's move on. The Lumix, the Panasonic Lumix G9 and the Olympus EM1 Mark II are mirrorless micro four thirds cameras. That's the class that it falls into. And you can see that they have a larger sensor than the previous two cameras that we looked at. The sensor on both of these is the exact same size with the same number of columns and rows, and they're both rated at 20.2 megapixels. When I looked at the average file size of the photos that I'm getting out of these cameras, the Panasonic was averaging around 24 megabytes, whereas the Olympus was averaging around 18.8. So that's telling me there's something going on with the Olympus to make that file size be reduced, or there's not something going on with the Panasonic that's not reducing that file. And it may have to do with some of the settings that I have. The Canon 5D Mark IV is a full frame sensor camera. It is the largest that most people like you and I might have. It is 6,720 by 4,480 pixels. It has a resolution of 30.1 megapixels, and the average file size here is 33 megabytes. It is quite large. I'm not saying you have to have a Canon 5D Mark IV, and I'm not saying you even have to have a mirrorless, but I would certainly hope you would have something better than a cell phone to take photos with. So we've talked about all the specifications, but let's take a look at physical size. Typically, more megapixels mean that physically that sensor inside that camera is larger. Now this is a relative size, and you can see the difference between the two previous cameras that we compared. The Canon 5D Mark IV, the full frame sensor, and then the Micro Four Thirds mirrorless camera. So you can see, you know, the one that gives you the 30 megabyte file is the sensor's much larger than the one that gives you the smaller files. Taking that a step further, this is the relative size difference between the top of the line DSLR and mirrorless cameras and your iPhone sensor. So if nothing else, I hope this convinces you that the quality of the image that you're going to get from your smartphone is not going to nearly rival one that you would get from a better camera. All right, so I think we've beat that horse. So pick a camera, borrow a camera, something. Get the best camera you can when you're taking pictures of your art. The next step is to record the largest file possible. And that's also related to settings in your camera. But I'm going to start off this discussion with the difference between two different file types. And now I know I'm hearing a collective groan from all of you out there, right? This is the other argument I think that I have with most artists when they're talking about the problem. Their photos don't look like their art, and I will ask, "Are you shooting in RAW or JPEG?" Well, JPEG, I'm not going to shoot in RAW, and there are reasons that I think you should shoot in RAW, and so you'll know that I come down on that side of the argument. But I understand you may decide to do something different. If you choose to shoot in RAW, you are going to be able to get more shades of color than if you shoot in JPEG. RAW files also allow for better highlight and shadow recovery in post-processing. You can do finer control and adjustments after the fact, and you can adjust colors much better in RAW files. So this is the back of one of my cameras. It's not the high-end camera, and it's not the lowest end camera. It's kind of middle of the road. But when I go into the settings to set picture quality, it allows me to select RAW file type. And then it also allows me to select a quality of RAW files. I want to pick the setting that's going to have the most pixels and the largest file. Okay, now remember, these recommendations are for you to capture the highest quality image you can of your art. This is not necessarily what I would recommend if you were doing travel photos or family snapshots or Christmas pictures or birthday pictures. But in this situation, you've got time to set your camera settings, to get everything set up. Nothing is moving at a fast pace. So we'll keep that in mind throughout this whole discussion. Pick the largest file with the most pixels. So what are the cons and why do people not want to use RAW? Well, one reason is they have to be post-processed. You have to do something with them after you take the picture. The files as they are really not usable. The files are also very large. Remember that 33 megabyte file that the Canon produced? It's not like you're going to be creating 1,000 pictures necessarily. So it's not like it's going to fill up your storage space. The file types are proprietary, which means that you have to make sure that you have software that you can use to edit these files. Typically, camera manufacturers provide this on a CD, or you can download it from their website, or you can use a third-party software like some of the Adobe products, Nik, ON1. There are lots of them out there. And there are some sharing issues with these files. You can't just take this file and give it to your family member or your friend and have them be able to do anything with it unless they have software that can read it. They're also not available to be, or you can't read them on the web. They have to be converted. Okay, so if you cannot or you choose not to use RAW, then you're going to shoot in JPEG. Here are some of the pros with using JPEG. It's fully processed in the camera. You don't have to do anything with it afterward if you don't want to. The files are typically small, and these files are compatible with most devices. Almost everything can read a JPEG file. You can upload it to the web, you can email it to someone, and most likely they'll be able to view your picture. There are some cameras that also allow you to pick different types of JPEG files or different compression. This is that same camera that I showed you earlier when we selected RAW file type. Now we've selected JPEG file type, and I can choose between 3 different sizes or 3 qualities: a large, a medium, and a small. According to their calculations, this particular large format, which has a resolution of 5,472 by 3,648, which is an aspect ratio of 3:2. They're saying I can print up to a 16 by 20 inch print at good quality. We're not worried about printing at this point, but we want to select the largest file size, best quality that we can. So what are the cons of JPEGs? Well, although it was a pro, it's also a con that it's fully processed in the camera because you cannot undo whatever decisions the camera has made. JPEG files by default are compressed files, and the camera just throws away certain parts of information. It's called a lossy compression, which means it's gone and you can't recover it. And so I don't know about you, but I like to have every bit of data and information that I can about my images. I want to make the decision about what gets thrown away. I do not want to rely on what some developer programmed into the camera. Once you have this JPEG file, you've limited the colors at this point. You've also limited any options you have for recovering any highlights or shadows in post-processing. So now we have talked about the file quality and the file size, and so let's talk about white balance, which is the other setting, the third camera setting that I think is most important. And I'm going to start with saying if you shoot in RAW, this setting is not that critical because you can change this in RAW files in post-processing. In JPEG files, it is baked into the JPEG, and you will have limited ability to correct for anything that the camera does wrong. We all know that light comes in different colors. You're an artist, so you're very aware of the different colors of light. The camera records what it sees. Our eyes and our brain, on the other hand, when the light changes, it compensates, and we really sometimes don't even notice the change in the light unless we're being very cognizant of it. But the camera doesn't know how to automatically make those adjustments, and so we have to tell it. If you select auto white balance, you're letting the camera decide what white balance it should use. And sometimes, the camera gets it wrong. Digital cameras are designed to try to make everything gray. So if you're taking pictures of white scenes, it tries to make them gray. If you're taking pictures of black scenes, it tries to make them gray. So I don't necessarily like to use auto white balance, but I shoot in RAW, so it doesn't really matter too much. I can fix it afterwards. The auto white balance technologies are getting better with every generation. And so I would say if you like to use auto and you have good results, great, keep using it. But just know that there are other settings that might give you better results. Sunny. All right. This is the symbol that you'll see for your white balance settings when you go to make choices. Most of them look like the sun, and it's for use in direct sunlight. I know that I have some artist friends who wait until there's a bright sunny day with no clouds in the sky, and then they take their art outside to take pictures because of the color that they get. If you choose the sunny, you're going to get some neutral colors, and it might work better for you than the auto white balance. Shade. Now this is not to use on a cloudy day, but if there's blue sky and it's sunny and you put your artwork in the shade, it's going to probably take on a blue tint unless you choose the shade white balance. Then it's going to warm up the scene a little bit. Cloudy. This you can use if the sky is cloudy. Now, unlike my artist friends, I like to shoot under a cloudy sky because the light is not direct, it's not harsh, it's very indirect and diffuse and pretty even. So if I choose to do that and choose a cloudy white balance, it's going to warm up the colors for me. It's going to shift the colors so that they're a little bit warmer. Incandescent setting or tungsten. This is what matches the lighting in most homes. Okay, most homes have this warm colored light, so it's going to cool things off a little bit. Fluorescent. There are so many different colors of fluorescent. For example, you may have more than one option. You could have for shooting under white fluorescent lights, for shooting under daylight fluorescent lights, and so on. So this may take some experimentation on your part to figure out which setting works best for you. So another setting for white balance is flash. And if you're going to be using your on-camera flash for things, this is the white balance you want to set. But I'm going to try to get you to not use your pop-up flash on your camera for this purpose. Custom. If none of the others seem to be working for you, if your camera allows you to create a custom white balance, you can create it just for the custom scene and the lighting situation that you're at. And you'll need to take a look at your camera manual to figure out how you do that with your camera, because everyone's a little bit different. Okay, so we've gone through camera settings. Now let's take a look at lighting setups. Remember I said no on-camera flash, especially that pop-up flash that comes up out of the camera, because you don't have any control over the direction of the light coming out of the camera. You can get, it results in uneven lighting and some reflections. So here's an illustration of an on-camera flash used to photograph an artwork. It's a 2D piece of art. And you can kind of see that the light is brighter in the center and it kind of falls off toward the edges. Now, you may not even be able to discern the differences between the lights on the corners and the light in the center, but your camera is going to pick that up. And you're going to get something that has a very well lit center with darker corners, and it might look like you've added a vignette. The other thing is shooting directly onto the artwork like this, especially if you have a glossy surface, it's going to get reflections and it's going to come back and be recorded in the photo. So the idea is not to use the on-camera flash, but to use maybe 2 or more light sources and ensure that the art is evenly lit all across. Okay, proper exposure. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of details on shutter speed and aperture, but we'll talk about exposure modes. And I'm going to urge you to select something other than the automatic modes that most cameras have, because they limit your control over the settings of the camera. One of the things that it limits or takes away from you is the ability to control the focus point. And that can be problematic, especially if you have 3D artwork that you're trying to photograph. So the ones to avoid, if you have a camera like a DSLR that looks something like this, the ones to avoid are those that are inside of this box. All the ones that are set up for specific scenes, they will let you make some changes to exposure settings, but not all exposure settings. So I would avoid these for taking pictures of your art. Or whatever camera you're using, they may look something like this, Intelligent Auto. So usually there's a green icon on your mode selection or your exposure mode selection. I would say avoid that for our purposes. Instead, choose one of these. These are manual or semi-manual shooting or exposure modes. And I'm not saying you have to go full-on manual. If you're afraid of these modes, start with Program or P. That's the one that will let you make some changes, and the camera will then make some other setting choices for you. Start there, and if it's still not working right, then I would move to Aperture Priority or AV in the Canon case. All right, basic editing. I will argue that every digital photograph needs some editing just because of the way that digital images are created in the camera. Every image can benefit from editing. How about let's put it that way? So what edits do we need to make? First, I would start with correcting color. Take a look at once you've pulled it into the computer, take a look at the color. Make sure your white balance is correct. Make sure the color temperature is correct. Is it too cool? Is it too warm? Are the colors too vibrant or are they not vibrant enough? And you can adjust for all of those. Remember that if you're working in JPEG files, you're going to have some limits to what you can do with these settings, but you can still make some changes. And then correct for exposure. Make sure your whites are white and they're not gray, and make sure your blacks are black and not gray. And match the overall brightness of the artwork to the real artwork. Okay, the overall brightness of the photo of the artwork to the artwork. But just remember that on your computer, you are looking at a backlit image. And so it may be brighter on your screen than it is in real life. Then straighten and crop. Make sure horizons are level. Make sure all the horizontals are horizontal. Make sure all the verticals are straight up and down. And then crop out the background. And if you want to go just inside the edges of the original artwork to make sure you've got all the background out of there, that should be fine. Okay, and so that's it. You've done all of the steps, and you should have a really high quality image that you are happy to submit to publications, to contest. If you think you need more information or would like to know more information about doing this, like I said, we are going to have an online workshop. These are some of the topics that we're going to explore more in depth. There is the URL. It's bvartleague.org/book-online. And so how is this going to work? Well, we're going to meet virtually for 1 hour on 3 consecutive days, May 12th, 13th, and 14th at 7 p.m. You can join with a computer or a smartphone. You don't need any other technology other than that. Access to the internet, I guess, is something I should say. And then afterwards, if you want, we can schedule a one-on-one meeting to go over questions you have about photographing your art, or if you want me to take a look at some of the things that you had been photographing and you feel like you need help with. So here's the URL again. It's bvartleague.org/book-online. And if you want to save $10 off of the $60 workshop fee, use the discount code you see up here, QuickSave10. And this code works until May 7th. After that, the code will not work. And this is the only place that we are sharing this code. So those of you who are here have the advantage. So with that, I will stop the show and open it up for questions. Does anyone have questions you would like? Let me see how to stop the share. Awesome. Okay, so if you've got a question, I will take a look in the chat. I've kind of been watching as we've been going along. There's a little bit of a delay between when I can see it and probably when you type it. Oh, you're welcome, Elena. Anyone have questions about what we talked about? Thanks, Wendy. A lot of this was based on your input. So what do we think? What editing program do I use? I am an Adobe fan. I made that commitment early on, and I knew that it was a commitment because I did the subscription. It's $10 a month, and I primarily use Adobe Lightroom. What it does for me as a photographer, I have a need to organize my photos to be able to find them when I'm looking for them and not have to spend a lot of time. And it allows me to add keywords and put them in folders and do all kinds of things with it. And I can upload it automatically to my website. I can do all kinds of things in Adobe Lightroom. So that's what I use primarily. And then if I need to, for some of my work, I will take it into Photoshop and do it, do some things in there. But like I said, I am an Adobe customer and I have been for a lot of years. I have tried some others, but I keep going back to the Adobe. Anyone else? Well, if you think of some questions later, go ahead and you could. I think you can go back and add them to the chat here, and we'll see them. We'll see them pop up and try to respond. If you have any questions about the workshop, if you go to that URL, there's more information there and some more details. Okay, so anyone have any more questions? Hey, Catherine. Sorry, we kind of got the timing mixed up. But I have been recording this, and so the recording will be there for anyone. We'll get it posted maybe this evening or tomorrow so that people can rewatch this. Oh, great, Kimberly. Thank you. I'm glad you did. There's a lot to try to cram into something, and so it's a little, there's just a lot. So I had to figure out what to leave out and what to include. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, then I guess we will sign off and see you next time. Thank you for joining us, everyone.